All right. So welcome everybody to Inspired Week here at Baker and Bloom. As I say, we're going to be getting into IB English life hacks. So these are just little things that students can do to help themselves have an easier time with IB English. First, a little bit about myself. Here's a picture that we took earlier this morning. I am one of the secondary English teachers here at Baker and Bloom, and I'm also one of the test prep specialists. So I help with IB, AP, GCSE, and a lot of English curricula, but I also help with SAT, ACT, SSAT, and various other assessments. My education background is predominantly American. I have degrees from the University of South Florida in Florida, and then Clemson University in South Carolina. And my first IB lesson was almost 20 years ago. I've been based in Hong Kong for almost 7 years now, and I'm having a fantastic time with the students in the city. So here are the 5 basic ideas we're going to be getting through today. We're going to start with expecting chaos, get through starting early, working out daily, building vocabulary, and showing work. Now, the first thing I want to bring up is expect chaos, because this is not normally one of the pieces of advice I give parents in particular. Unfortunately, the IB recalibrated a lot of their English curriculum last year. So the current group of students, the current seniors, students who will be starting their last year this month, are supposed to be the first group to graduate with the new curriculum. So a lot of schools are adjusting to the new curriculum anyway. And then obviously the coronavirus situation has complicated things a lot more, so that the IB this year, in May of this year, cancelled a lot of the final exams. And for the coming year, so for testing in May 2021, they're also cancelling some of the exams. A lot of the information on that front is still early and preliminary. So I imagine a lot of schools are going to be scrambling a little bit to address some of these concerns. So do just bear in mind, the schools will be adapting as well as we're adapting, and there may be some disruptions and a little bit of unpredictability going on. But with a bit of luck and paying attention and trying to stay calm and understand that everyone's in mostly the same boat, we can get through. So that's really just a warning that there may be some difficulty in the coming year, but it's probably going to be hitting everyone. So don't worry too much if you're feeling a little bit behind. So the normal hacks will begin with start early. Start early. With the English in particular, begin early. As soon as you know what the reading lists are, get those books and start reading. The students don't have to be studying and digging through the texts and pulling out every last piece of information they can. That's the point of the course. They'll have 2 years to go through a lot of that information. But what I get very often is that we're coming into sort of the second semester of the last year, when students are really starting to get down to the wire, and they're still looking and they still have a book or 2 books that they haven't read. And obviously that creates a lot of pressure, that creates a lot of stress, and it also means that students aren't getting adequate preparation in. So even if the students aren't going to be studying the book necessarily for another 6 months, if they start reading it now, just to have read the book once, when they study later on, they'll have a lot of the grounding, a lot of the questions of, well, who is this person and where is this plot going? Those questions will be answered, and so students can focus more on the sort of details that the curriculum will be asking students to pull out. I do know that a lot of schools will hold back on the information and not necessarily tell students what information is coming up or what the texts are going to be, which is obviously where parents have a lot of leeway and a lot of capacity for then getting into contact with the teachers and saying, hey, can you please give me your books, and that sort of thing. The earlier you know, the faster you can prepare. And then, again, I get students who come in and say that they haven't even read the book or they've not finished the book. Realistically, one of the best ways to secure high marks in the IB and succeed very well in the IB is to have read those books a couple of times. Read once sort of early, read once with the school, and then read once as part of your final review. And that's really going to help build confidence, reinforce ideas, and that sort of thing. Very often students will get intimidated. Oh, I've got to read this twice. But if you're reading it twice over the course of 18 months, or you're reading it 3 times over the course of 3 years, it's a little easier. Especially if you have a student who's doing the language and literature portion of the curriculum, which is including much more things like plays. I really enjoy it when students are teaching plays, because a play, really, you should be able to read in about 3 hours. So the students really need to be reading the text 2 to 3 times. And a big part of that is starting early. It's very difficult to read a novel when you've also got, HL physics exams coming up and TOK essays due and things like that. So start early, read each text multiple times. And finally, don't use places like SparkNotes, make your own. Obviously, there are a lot of resources online. Some of them are available for free. Some of them have to be paid and this sort of thing that will give students study guides. And I'm not necessarily opposed to study guides. They can be very useful. But what's more useful is students building their own study guides, because the process of actually making the guide is incredibly useful. And again, starting early and rereading the books is going to help build these guides. So the students can read this book, the text, the poems, whatever it happens to be, the first time, and just get down basic information. Who are the main characters? Where is it set? What's the main plot? Is it a war story? Is it a love story? Is it a poem about family? And then as students read more, as students get deeper into the text, as students get more familiar, they can fill those notes out. And creating those notes and thinking about it and organizing it and looking at the spreadsheet and arranging everything is a fantastic way of studying. It's a fantastic way of getting the student brain to engage with the information in a variety of different ways. And the more variety of ways students engage with this kind of information, the stronger they'll catch it, and the more they'll retain it. And also, it's a great way for students to collaborate with each other to build their Spark notes, and then that sparks conversation, and conversation is also going to be useful. So starting early puts us in a great position to lay a foundation for having a lot of the information really concrete, really strongly connected, and ready to go. So we want to start early. Once we start early, we then want to work out daily. It's very much a cliche to say that the human brain is a muscle. It's biologically inaccurate, but it's a very common thing to say, in that you've got to work at it all the time. You can't just go to the gym once a week and do a crazy half-hour workout and expect to get massive muscle or lose a lot of weight. Similarly, a 6-hour cram session is not going to be as effective as if a student is doing a small bit of reading, a small bit of analysis every day. So what I recommend is, don't necessarily think about reading the books for school. A lot of the skills used in English curricula, things like message analysis, things like pattern recognition, things like connecting ideas to each other, things like understanding actions and thoughts in context, these are very broad-based skills. These are skills that don't necessarily tie to one particular book or play or poem. Students can be doing all kinds of things on a small day-to-day basis. So things like, there are many services that will send a poem a day, and they'll send a poem to your inbox, and you read it, and great, you've read a poem. Maybe you didn't understand the poem, maybe you didn't like the poem, but you've read it, you've thought about it, you've maybe encountered some words that you didn't know or encountered some techniques that you didn't know, and it's a little bit extra. I get a lot of students who don't realize that they can analyze things like TV shows, and they can analyze things like YouTube videos. I'm not saying everything. Obviously, there's a lot of junk out in the world. But there's a lot of great television, there's a lot of great music, there's a lot of great podcasts, there's a lot of great art that students can use to get in a little bit of daily exercise, a little bit of analyzing a message. They can look at the poem And they can say, well, I like the poem because X, or I don't like the poem because Y. Or they can look at a commercial and say, this is an effective commercial because of this, or that's not an effective commercial because of that. And it's a little way of practicing those skills and those thinking patterns every day. It's a lot like when I get a lot of students who play tennis, and everyone knows how to hit a tennis ball. But it's little things every day that are going to help build up the strength and help refine those skills to get through. You don't have to be playing a massive tournament every week. If you're playing a little bit of practice most days, you can refine those skills over time. And again, starting early and working out daily go hand in hand because students need to build up over time. So low intensity, long-term exercise produces results. Low intensity, lower the stakes. I find a lot of students are very stressed out. I find a lot of students get anxious when they don't immediately experience success. So by making it low intensity and maybe a bit more fun and less academic, then that lowers the stakes and it encourages students to experiment and try and take risks, which is a major component in academic growth. It's a big part of what I bring into my classroom, in that a lot of my students think of literature as being something that happens in giant old dusty books, and they don't necessarily realize that we can apply the same kind of skills to all kinds of everyday media. I typically like to use big movies like the Marvel movies or Harry Potter and things like that to get students thinking about it. So light workouts every day are definitely going to help. So working out daily is a great way to build skill. Begin early, work out daily, and build cultural vocabulary. English is a challenge for a great many students once we get to literature, because literature is largely about the human experience. Most of the things that students are going to read, and indeed a lot of the stuff that the IB focuses on, is looking at what we can think of as the human condition. What is it to be a person? What is it to be a person who lives in a society? And obviously, this is a very big, complex topic with a lot of moving parts, and students are young. Students in high school have not had a great deal of life experience. They're still learning. And so one thing that gets in the way of some students' success is that they don't have a cultural vocabulary. They focus on building their literary vocabulary, studying vocab words and getting flashcards and going to Duolingo and this sort of thing, but they're not necessarily building up a cultural vocabulary, a breadth of experience. Something like mathematics is a foundational skill. You learn a topic in math, and then that applies out to different other topics. You might learn how to take an average, which you can then apply to different sciences. You can then apply to statistics. You can apply it to a wide variety of other topics. English works a little bit differently. If you learn something in a history class, that might then play a role in the text you're reading. You might learn something in a philosophy class that then applies to the book you're reading. You might learn something in history that then provides some background for a text you're learning and gives you a little bit of extra insight. So building this cultural vocabulary is very helpful because it helps students understand a lot more of what's going on. It helps students recognize that there is much more to the text than they originally realized. And so when I talk about cultural vocabulary, it's simply things like many cultures associate owls with wisdom. The United States is not a particularly old country. Things like this. It's very difficult to say what is and is not cultural vocabulary because it's essentially life experience. And it's also very difficult to say, this is what you should do, or that's what you should do, because different students are going to have different experiences anyway. They're going to have different cultures at home. They're going to have different experiences with different friends, obviously they'll have lived in different places and spoken to different people. I say, the more you have, the better off you are. Because you do not know what's going to be relevant. You don't know you're not able to predict what's going to come up. So the best way to approach it is simply experience as much as possible. So encourage students, encourage your children to experience things. Watch documentaries, read a variety of books. I know sometimes it can be really frustrating. I have students sometimes who just disappear into YouTube. And I sometimes talk to parents who get very frustrated because their child simply disappears into YouTube. But one of the things that we can use with a lot of the online media that students consume is, instead of just watching random game streamers, we can maybe push them to short documentaries, short explorations of ideas, 5-minute explainers. Hey, what was the Trojan War? What is string theory? There's a great many resources like this available online, where it's just like little things that are helping build a student's background. So literature is a study of human experience. Texts could well be bringing in a great many different topics that students may or may not understand. Students may not have experience with it. So building that vocabulary broadens horizons, deepens understanding, and also gets students more comfortable with new experiences. Again, this is something that is going to work better over time, because if you cram it, if you push it, if you force it, big chunks don't work. It becomes very intense, but then there's very little retention. So starting early, daily workouts, building the vocabulary are all about this low level building up of intensity. Because that is the key to English. That is the key to literary study. Because for the most part, for a lot of these students, they're not really learning new skills. Most of the students I encounter, particularly in IB, they know how to read English. They're very comfortable reading English. But what they're doing is refining those skills. And that's where it takes time. So the next life hack we're going to look at is show your work. Now, this is one of the big ones. This is one of the big ones. Students are used to showing their work in other classes. Every student I've ever taught math to, we do math sometimes with the SAT and the ACT, show your work. I say to them, show your work, and they know exactly what I'm talking about. And they understand it in math. They understand that the teacher isn't necessarily concerned with what answer the student has received or arrived at. The teacher is more concerned with how the student got there. And the same is true for English. I frequently get students who make assertions. They will say that perhaps a fox is associated with bravery. And it's entirely possible that a fox could be associated with bravery, or that an ocean might represent power. But what students don't do is explain why. And sometimes it's because it's very obvious. The ocean is associated with power because it is very large and powerful. Sometimes it's not very obvious at all and requires explaining. But students aren't used to showing their work in English. Students aren't used to making those connections and explaining their ideas more fully, which is even more important in English than it is in math, because of the idea that in English there are no right answers, which is an inaccurate statement that annoys me every time a student mentions it. But it is based on a truth that English answers are more subjective, so showing your argument is more important. What we can do at home is talk. As students consume things, as students read, as students learn, talk to them, ask them. Ask why, ask how, ask so what. Because very often I find students coming into literature and they think it's the study of books. And that's not wrong, but it's incomplete. Literature is the study of books, but it's also the study of ideas. I tell many of my kids that literature is taking part in a conversation that humans have been having for 10,000 years, trying to figure out where we are and what we're doing. And a large part of that is explaining where your ideas come from. What are your values? And so having conversations with your students is a great way to get into this sort of thing. When they express an opinion, ask them to explain it. Frequently, in my experience, the students won't know how to explain their ideas. We get discussions of, I like a school uniform, I don't like a school uniform, and I say, why? And they don't know how to explain their ideas. They simply say, well, I don't, or I do. And so encouragement to get students to think about these ideas. Why don't I like school uniform? Why am I in favor of this particular idea? Or why do I think that that's a bad thing? Getting students to address those ideas or just think about those ideas and talk about them in conversation is a massive game changer, especially over time, because it works in two great ways. One, it helps students understand their own values, which means they are in a stronger position to then look at the values presented by the curriculum. If the student has a better idea of where he or she stands and what he or she believes, then they have a much better position for understanding what other people believe and what other people know. Conversation with parents or conversation with family members, guardians, family friends, this sort of thing is a great way to do it because it takes a lot of the stress off. It takes a lot of the hard stakes off. Usually, the only time students have to conduct these kind of discussions is in the classroom. And in the classroom, you're in a space where you're going to be graded. You're in a space where an idea that maybe doesn't work, that maybe is still in the process of being sorted out, maybe isn't going to get a good grade. And if it's not going to get a good grade, it might not be worth discussing. So what we can do outside of school is create a space where students can feel free to experiment with their ideas and fail. Because failure is a key part of growth. And frequently, students don't have room to fail in class. So if we can generate that outside the classroom, and we can point out, well, maybe your ideas don't take into account these truths, or maybe that's a good thought, have you considered these other elements? That's a great way for building student confidence, building student ability, and also getting them used to connecting ideas. Similarly, based on this, and I should have included this as a bullet point, I'm afraid I didn't, I highly encourage all of my students to keep a journal. Very few of them do because I guess journals aren't cool, but I highly recommend all my students do. Whether it's like a physical notebook, whether it's a word processing file, if they keep a Word document that they want to use. Some students use blogs, but I'm reluctant there because blogs have an audience, and very often students get caught up in writing for the audience. The idea of keeping the journal is to have something personal and free, where they can write out their ideas, where they can experiment with language, where they can get used to expressing not only their own thoughts and their own ideas, but also expressing their own voice. Because these things are going to be very useful for writing more creative essays and writing more engaging essays. And also it's going to help with that writing practice again to improve writing across the board. Writing, much like any other English language skill or language skill in general, is a muscle. It gets better with practice. So having the journal is a bit like having weights in your room or having a stationary bike in your room. You can go in, you can sit down, and you can write for a half an hour. If it's complaining about your day, that's great. If it's inventing a fantasy world of magic and fairies and wizards and this sort of thing, that's totally fine. It's about the experience. It's about having the practice. So again, starting early, this is going to give us time to do things relatively low stress and relatively low impact over a long amount of time, because that is the best way to approach the skills required by the sort of English curricula that we're looking at. Start early. Daily workouts. Starting early does you no good if you're not getting a little bit in every day, if you're not getting a little bit in further and further. And again, it's like when you're trying to lose weight and you decide you're going to take the stairs instead of taking the lift. Instead of watching a half hour of cartoons, I'm going to spend half an hour reading a short story. And there are loads of different authors that are writing incredible stuff in a variety of incredible ways. I get students in who say they don't like reading, And I am firmly of the opinion that that's a case of you just haven't found the right writer. Because people have been writing for thousands of years. Someone has written something that is interesting to you. Students just have to find it. Okay. So, just as we get in, I just wanted to discuss some resources, and I will be, unfortunately, the list I had of this is, the file got corrupted, so I wasn't able to have it prepared quite this morning, but I am working on it. So there's a number of resources that parents can use and students can use for getting in some of these daily practices. There's obviously a lot of social media where students can join writing groups and students can join discussion groups or organize their own within school, at school, for casual discussion of the text or general discussion of the text. Obviously, as with anything online, you want to be careful. Obviously, if you go into a very large community, there are going to be all kinds of people with all kinds of agendas. Some of them might not be appropriate in terms of age range. You might find some that are discussing like at a college level. You might find some that are discussing at a lower level. But finding a community to talk and again have that low stakes practice is very useful. When it comes to individual reading or individual text every day, there are so many podcasts and like YouTube channels that get into this sort of thing. The New Yorker magazine has a poetry and a short fiction podcast, which is authors and poets reading short stories and poems that have been in the New Yorker and then discussing them. So students get to hear the story, and then they get to hear writers and editors and poets and people who are working with literature and these ideas discussing them. So there's a huge backlog of that. There's a variety of other podcasts that get into literary analysis for a variety of different topics. You will find Shakespeare podcasts. One of my favorite authors, Thomas Pynchon, there's a couple of podcasts dedicated to him. Once you get onto YouTube, there's a number of places that will do analysis of texts that students might not be expecting. Again, one of my favorites is a YouTube channel called Errant Signal that does critical, like, literature class analysis of computer games. And there are obviously going to be a ton that do it with movies. I believe there's a channel that's called Every Frame a Painting or something to that effect. Again, I'll be producing a list and sending it out. And even though these things might not be necessarily directly associated with literature in the fact of we're not looking at books and novels, it's still exercising the same key skills. It's still looking at a message and understanding how that message has been put together. So those are going to be very useful, powerful resources as well, just for day to day. I know Read Theory is a great website. That's readtheory.org. That's calibrated for students to do reading comprehension on their own. It may be skewed a little bit low for high-performing IB students, but that's a really great site because it provides metrics and analysis and things like that for helping with reading comprehension basics. Okay, so moving forward, that's about it with the life hack. So again, it really comes down to this idea of long-term, low-intensity practice, like you would essentially like athletic conditioning. Building up those skills in an environment where students are encouraged to take risks, but also in an environment that encourages them to think and explain their ideas. Unfortunately, with English, when students, as Mayuk has pointed out, please feel free to add any questions you would like to the chat. But again, low intensity, low risk, long term. Read the texts early and often, and make your own notes. Building your own notes helps you study, helps you retain that knowledge, rather than just going on some website and reading what someone else has written. If you're just going to read what someone else has written, you're better off reading the book. Okay. Oh, excuse me. So, just as a little bit of a coda here, we have some of our fall 2020 offerings. So here we have on the left we have our primary offerings. Obviously, if you're having IB DP students, those particular students won't be good for primary. But if you have younger children, we have one-on-one private coaching, inspired reader and writer, creative writing, STEM, and Chinese. And those are obviously all going to be built around our core principles of creative literacy. And then we have secondary, which again, one-on-one coaching and private courses, which would quite likely be with me, although possibly also with my colleague Mark, or potentially a few other people as well. Academic writing, which is largely about building student reading, writing skills. The current upcoming module is actually based on the IBTOK course. So we're going to be looking at different sources and different ways of approaching different ways of learning and knowledge. And then obviously we can provide support for English in terms of IGCSE, IBDP. We can also, outside of English, help with STEM. And then test prep and boarding school. So as I said, I also do SAT, ACT, and then some of the SSAT and some of those associated tests. It's not listed here, but we can also help with AP. I mean, realistically, if you have a question about whether or not we can help with something, give us a call, and if we can help, we'll certainly try and figure it out. For those of you who may want to be looking for more information, we do have some more discussions coming up in Inspired Week. Here we have later today, internships and projects, which is about helping students get into internships and projects, which are going to help with extracurricular applications for colleges and different ways that we can do things to help students with their college applications. That's with Miss Renee Bowie. Then tomorrow, it's going to be about our main school, Bloom Academy. Again, that's going to be with Miss Bowie and our entire team. And then Saturday, we're looking at college admissions. So that again is Miss Bowie, but also our admission specialist, Miss Karen Kwok. Both of those, there's the US college admissions journey and what UK and US boarding schools look for. Those are going to be looking at different ways. That's going to be looking at different things parents and students can do to help improve their applications and help improve their chances for moving forward into university and beyond. So at this point, we're a little bit ahead of schedule, it seems, just a few minutes. But if anyone has any questions, please feel free to add them to the chat. If you're having trouble finding the chat button, it should be, excuse me a moment, it should be down here at the bottom in the chat balloon. So if anybody has questions, please feel free to add them to the chat. And I will answer them to the best of my ability. You are most welcome. It's one of the most famous part of the jobs. Teams. I have a question here come through from Mayuk. So can you explain how you typically work with a student for one-to-one coaching? So obviously, with an individual student, you're obviously going to have individual needs and that sort of thing. So one of the things I like to do initially is obviously talk to the parents, see what the parents' wants, needs are, and then talk to the students, see what the students' wants, needs are, which are generally overlapping, but occasionally there's a little bit of a difference. And I'm a big believer in, as I believe has come through in this presentation, giving students room to experiment and fail. So I'm a big fan of the Socratic method in that I will just ask students questions and allow them to take their ideas out. So students make claims, we look at those claims and we see how well they're developing their ideas, supporting their ideas out. Obviously, right now there's a lot, we're working online, so there's a lot of sharing media, things like multimedia videos, shared workspaces with Google Docs and that sort of thing, because we can't get the paper out and get the projector out in the classroom. But I am also a big believer in a multimedia environment, because we live in a multimedia environment. And sticking to books is not providing students with all of the skills they might need out in the world, where they're not necessarily just going to be sticking to books. And then obviously, if you have a small group, the dynamic changes a little bit as well. But it's predominantly sitting down, having a conversation with a lot of multimedia resources available to flesh out ideas and explore alleys we fall down. Fall down. Fall down, walk down. We've got a variety of verbs. You never know how you're going to hit an alley, sometimes in the literature conversations. Well, I'm going to hang around. I'll hang around until 2, at which point I have to attend to another engagement. If you have any questions, please feel free to stick around and add them to the chat. If you feel you've received all the information you would like, thank you for coming. Thank you for attending. Please do reach out if you have any other questions, or please feel free to sign up for any of our other webinars. Will be, as I say, the schedule is there. Thank you very much for your time. Aha. The classic question of how to encourage secondary students to read more. This is always a challenge. And in my experience, you can push some, but if you push too hard, if you push a teenager to anything too hard, you're just going to wind up hurting yourself. As I've said, one of the big things I find is that a lot of students, it's about finding what they want to read, because students read all the time. As a society, we read more than people have ever read before, but what we're reading is text messages. What we're reading is websites. So a large part of what I found is finding something that the student wants to read, finding something that the student enjoys reading about. Now, that can be very challenging depending on what the student is into. And there is obviously a degree of weaning that goes on. So I had one example with a student. This was a student about 3 or 4 years ago. The student was about 14 and did not enjoy reading at all. Came to me, parents came to me, it wasn't going very well. The student was a big fan of computer games, and actually was a big fan of, I forget the name of the series, Halo. It was the Halo series. The student was a very big fan. And so we got some Halo books. We got some paperback novels that had been written in that universe, and we started him on those. And that got him into reading. That got him past the idea that reading sucked. Because here he was reading about something he enjoyed, and he was starting to connect reading with fun. Then we moved from there to similar, maybe a little less commercial, a little less video gamey science fiction writing. And then we went through science fiction and we got out into some other texts as well. We didn't get him to the point where he was, eagerly reading Shakespeare, but we did manage to get him to enjoy a bit more reading and get into expand his tastes through that one initial idea. This is one of the things I think is really good for something like short stories. You can go and you can find collections of like the best American short stories. I really like, there's a group called McSweeney's that's a publisher, and they put out every year the best American non-required reading, best American short stories. And I find those collections are really good because you can read one story and it's not great, but the next story is really, really going to catch you. So one thing I would recommend as well is a wide variety of smaller pieces, because novels are intimidating. But if I give a student a 3-4 page short story, they're much more likely to get in it, and they're much more likely to read it. The more they're reading, the more variety I can give them. The more variety I can give them, the more likely I am to find something or someone that they enjoy reading. And once I've got one, that gives me grounding to move on to 2. I think it's largely about getting students past the idea that all reading is Shakespeare. I'd say, okay, if my child is not on an IB track, would the group class offerings be less relevant for us? It really depends on the group class. All of our baseline curricula applies to the IB, but it's not IB designed. It's basically the goals we are trying to achieve line up with the IB's goals. If you have students that are on GCSE and they want to come in for like academic writing, or they want to come in for a group class, yeah, we can absolutely accommodate that. The academic writing, in this case, yes, is kind of based on the IB, but it's also just, it's kind of an introductory philosophy and introductory English course. So it's not going to be as explicitly tied to the curriculum, but it will be useful because a lot of that course is actually looking at how do we know what we know. And so there's going to be a lot of discussion of assessing sources, which, given the way the internet has changed the way people consume information and the way ideas like fake news and propaganda have spread, it's probably going to be fairly useful there. Yeah, even though it is somewhat tied to the IB curriculum, it's not going to be like, oh, you're not in IB, you don't get it. It's going to be fine for everyone. It's just maybe the IB students will get a little bit of an edge out of it based on the connection to that curriculum. Aha. And I've just been, sorry, another piece of information has just come through. The course I'm describing about TOK, that's our G910 offering right now. The G910 offering is obviously for students in grades 9 and 10. 7, 8, we're looking a little bit lower, obviously because they're younger students. I have to double check. One of my colleagues is handling the lead on that particular course. I know there's going to be a lot of getting into things like ideas of voice and finding how more ways to express individually in writing. So that's going to be, that would be the course that a younger student would take. That's going to be our G7A, and that's not tied to any particular curriculum in any way at all, as far as I'm aware. As I say, my colleague is running the point on that. I'll have to double check with him, but that's a much more wide open, broad base topic. Someone has brought up the point of private classes. Excuse me for a moment. We do offer private classes. Private classes are pretty much flexible. We can address on a variety of topics. Kind of depends on individual student schedules and individual teacher capacity and this sort of thing. But generally speaking, if we can teach something and if one of our teachers is available to teach it, we will teach it. So like just for me over the summer, one of my colleagues and I in the STEM department, my colleague Mr. Trevor Allen and I worked together on, or with a group who came in and they wanted a custom course on computer game design and marketing. So we built that for them. It took a bit of time, but we did that. So with private classes, we have a fairly wide philosophy. If we can help, we will help. So for that, I would really recommend contacting the office and there would be a conversation involved there. But private classes, usually we're talking one-on-one or small groups. As I say, this game design and marketing course was a small group of 4. I have had in the past, starting next week, I have a class that's 2 young students who are coming in together. They're working on classes. They go together to the same school, so they're working on courses together. So that's another option that we have as well. Excuse me for a moment. All right. Sorry, a moment, one of my colleagues is... Aha. All right, so at this point, it looks like the questions have more or less wound down, so I think this will be a good point for us to close up. I'm just going to leave, excuse me for one moment, I've lost track of the screen just for a second. And so I'm just going to share now, here's the last slide, which is just some contact information. So we have some QR codes there. We're on Instagram, we're on Facebook. You can email us at info@bnb.edu.hk, or you can phone 2110-4788, and the website is Baker and Bloom there at the bottom. So these are all the ways you can contact us if you would like more information, if you would like to book some classes, if you would like to set up a meeting to discuss. Please do feel free to contact us. And excuse me a moment, one more. All right. And well then, if no one has any questions, thank you, thank you. Enjoy the rest of your day. And I look forward to seeing many of you in our halls, well, once things clear up and we are once more in our halls. Thank you.